So I'm going to try my best to keep things moving along in the presentation. I'm going to try and, we're going to cover some topics both at a high level and then also in some depth. We're going to do a little bit of participation stuff, but nothing crazy. You're not going to have to move or anything like that. This isn't, by participation, I mean maybe showing hands, or we might have like an online quiz you can hop on. But I'm also going to try and keep you guys awake because I feel really bad since I'm the last speaker. I don't know if those bells are going to keep on going on after this one, and if you guys fall asleep during this presentation, then you miss your flight, and then who knows what could happen for that. So yes, we're going to try and keep things interesting. So this topic, as you can, those of you in the audience who can read can tell, this is about centralized application configuration with ZooKeeper and Spring. Well, actually, I didn't read that right, but Spring and ZooKeeper. So now, like I mentioned, I'm going to ask you guys in the audience here to participate, but there's also a secondary audience that I'm going to address right now, so you guys don't have to pay attention to this, because this is also going to be on YouTube later. And so those of you watching this now on YouTube, when I'm asking the audience members to raise their hand or participate in things, it's okay for you not to do that, because your coworkers are just going to think you're really weird if you're like. But if it helps you kind of get in the moment and kind of feel the groove, kind of get in that conference feel, raise your hand and kind of clap every once in a while, that's cool too. Yeah, at any moment you guys feel like the need to spontaneously applaud, which I don't. There we go. Yeah. People just start floating. Yeah, just feel free to applaud at any moment, and also feel free to ask questions at any moment. If it's something I'm definitely going to be covering later on, I may hold the answer to later. But we're going to start out with me asking a question here. It says, how do you configure your applications? And I'm going to put a URL up here that you can start going to while I explain what's going to go on. This is a software I didn't have anything to do with writing, but it's free and it's cool, so we're going to use it here real fast. We're going to have a quick 2-question quiz just to kind of get a feel for where you guys are as an audience, because we're going to talk a lot in this talk about how we as an organization addressed centralized configuration and how we as an organization addressed some of the problems we had. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our architecture, who we are as a company and things like that. But I want to get a feel for what is going on with you guys and your application. So I'm going to go ahead and open this to see if any of you have found a chance to find this yet. Okay, so this is our quiz in progress. So yeah, so the first question you'll see here is how many applications you need to configure your organization. Now, if you lost the URL, which because I switched this, you're not going to be able to see the URL. So there's the URL there again. So that's just, you go there, log in student, enter config2gx. I see that there are 4 people who have gone on there now. I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. We can establish a safe word right now, and if you guys just say it, we'll just stop right there, okay? So, but if you want to, there's going to be 2 questions. The first one just kind of like a getting started. We have 5 eager participants so far. Oh, 7, we're jumping up. So again, there's the URL, I just hit it again, is, those of you just coming in, if you want to go to b.socrative.com, if you just go to the main page, you don't have to do the login student. Then there's like a teacher button, and in the bottom corner, there's like a place you can type in like the config2gx is like the room name. Look at you guys. You guys are performing at like a first day, first meeting like level of performance. Like 11 of you have already logged in. This is like, you guys have clearly had some caffeine this morning or something. So let's take a look at what some of these people have answered so far while people are still coming in. So we have some people have less than 10 applications they're configuring. Some people have 10 to 20. Some people are in the 60 to 9,000 range. That's where I expect a lot of them to be. Nobody is over 9,000 yet, which is probably good. You probably would be busy doing nothing but configuration right now if you're in that category. So now we got 19 people here. If you didn't get a chance to answer the first one, oh well, we're going to move on. Oh wait, there's 15 to 20 answers. There's 5. I got like 5 more people answer. So I know you don't have to be exact. We're not going to audit you on this or anything. We're not going to send this back to your CTO or whatever. Looks like a lot of people are in the 10 to 20 range, or we got a distribution with a lot of them 10 to 20, a lot of 60 to 9,000, kind of in there, kind of medium. Probably just started doing some microservices, starting some services, probably starting to feel some of the configuration pain. And then the D category is, I mean, it's big, but once you get over 60 applications, it's kind of irrelevant how many you have, right? Like somewhere between 60 and 9,000 is a lot, and still no over 9,000. That's fine. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. The last person who get a chance to answer this one. I'm sorry. Okay, so this one's going to be a short answer one. Just going to be like I'm trying to figure out what your biggest challenge that you guys have faced when you've been configuring your applications. I'm assuming if you're in this topic, you might be interested in ZooKeeper because it's cool. You kind of heard it a bit. We're going to talk a little bit about ZooKeeper, definitely. But we're going to talk about some of the challenges that we faced as an organization and how we addressed them. And I'm curious if any of them line up with you, because I don't think our organization is unique in this. You know, in Dave Seyer's presentation, he talked about there's some patterns that emerge when people start doing a lot of different problems with, you know, when you have more than one application talking to each other, there's some common things. And configuration is one of those patterns. So I'm assuming we're not the only ones. I won't show your names just because, you know, whatever. So here's some of the answers. Environments. So we got some automation via homegrown bash scripts. Why do I keep on hiding that? Here we go. These are coming in good, good. I'm not sure why the software keeps on hiding the answers on me, but again, I didn't write it, so it's kind of cool though. Maybe less cool. Let me zoom out. Maybe show more. It's QA, configuration management process for making changes is impossible. URLs for different environments. Lots of things to configure, multiplied by the number of environments, moving configs between environments, typos. Yeah, you know what? A lot of these, I'm thinking you guys see other people's answers, you probably are kind of nodding your heads like, yeah, that's a challenge that we face too. Like, you're not, like, you know, this isn't like a configurations anonymous meeting. I don't expect you to all stand up and say, you know, I'm here and I have a configuration problem, but you know, you're not alone in the struggle you have with configuration. And the solution that we're going to talk about today that we came up with at dealer.com met the needs that we have at dealer.com. And so I'm going to tell you, to kind of understand where we came from, or you know, kind of what led us into working on this project is, first, to take a step back and explain who our company is, what we do. Dealer.com is a company, as a company, we make software that car dealers use to fulfill their digital marketing visions. So that sounds like a marketing phrase, and I kind of copied that from our marketing department because that is kind of a marketing phrase. What that really means is that, but it is really what we do though. We provide car dealerships with websites so they can market their cars to their customers as they see fit. They're customizable, they're also very popular. We have over 12,000 car dealerships using our platform. If you're ever shopping for a new car, you're probably going to hit one of our sites if you go to more than one dealer. And if you're in certain manufacturers, you're definitely going to hit our sites because every single one of their websites is on our platform. Also, we do have solutions for car dealerships to manage their advertising with Google AdWords, with Google Display Advertising. We do real-time bidding on display ads. We help them manage their inventory. We help them analyze the data coming in from their websites. As you can imagine, with that many car dealerships on our platform, we get a lot of data coming in. So we have many teams devoted to just doing that big data crunching. We have a CRM product that we recently launched that's gaining a lot of traction. There's a lot of data involved in a CRM, a lot of things going on. So there's a lot of these, all of our products, none of them are monoliths. All of them have at least, you know, 2 or 3 services that they talk to. Many of them talk to many, many more services. And as we grew as an organization and we grew in our services, some of them microservices, some of them more traditional kind of bigger services. But as we grew, we started to have a lot of pain around configuration management. Some of the things you guys had, you know, URL changes between environments or typos, like simple mistakes, you can kind of like blow things up. So we started a remote configuration project at our work. We started this maybe a year and a half ago. We've done it a little bit on again, off again as priorities in the business have changed. Recently, we've been doing it more heavily than in the past. But before we started this project, we kind of took an inventory a bit of how our applications were configured. And we found each application was configured slightly differently. You know, obviously, sometimes someone just hard codes something in there. It happens, you know, especially if you're working hard to get things out there. That usually didn't happen a lot. In our case, a lot of stuff was done in properties files that were checked in with the code and built and pushed out along with the code. And so as we would you know, make changes to this stuff, when the things would roll out, a lot of times we'd have a problem where somebody would have made a change for the dev, QA, beta environments, whatever. They get to the live environment and oops, I forgot to make that change. And then now the property file is committed with a source, so we had to push out a new build to address that. Even with the fastest build delivery system in the world, you're still, if it's bundled with your source, you know, you're still looking at least a couple minutes to get that out there to a number of servers. You know, sometimes we'd have host files that would be, you know, every application would talk to the same host name, and then the host file in the box would manage which specific instance they talk to, which, as you can imagine, that's kind of not a really good way of doing things. It can lead to some confusing scenarios. JNDI context files are also used. So some of the motivation was cleaning this mess up. I mean, there were some other motivating factors for us working on this project. I know somebody mentioned like an unmanageable configuration management process. So you guys have a process. A lot of places have no process around this, which leads to like security compliance concerns, right? Like if you have properties files with your database and plain text. And you get a security audit, you're going to get some questions. Yes? Yes, I can slow down a little bit. Thanks for asking. I have a tendency to talk quickly, so I'm going to try and slow down. Yeah, and if I start talking too fast, you can just kind of like do that, and I'll try and slow down more for you. Sorry. So developer efficiency was one of the things we wanted to address. We wanted to make it easier for our developers to deploy applications out and not have to redeploy them when there was nothing more than a configuration change. Ideally, all the configuration should be right the first time the application rolls out, but if there was a last-minute fix that you needed to do, just fix the configuration, restart the app, or however, and it would work. Security compliance was another concern. We wanted to make sure that we could pass security audits by having things like not having live database passwords just in plain text places. We also wanted to have a process where we could track who made changes to configuration and also limit who could make changes to configuration for our live systems. And also we wanted to empower our systems engineers who are kind of behind the scenes managing our databases where they live and things like that. We wanted to enable them to make certain changes without having to have like an in-depth knowledge of what everything was using. So for instance, they could change a database from one place to the other. And then as we started this development process, we noticed, like many things on the framework development, this is kind of Guns N' Roses style. I took this from someone's Twitter, or address is down there. This is kind of like the process where you started doing framework development, where you start out one way, and if anyone's ever heard the song "Welcome to the Jungle," and you've seen this, you may have seen this tweet before, but you kind of starts out, you kind of have your abstraction layer picked out, you think you're going to go great with it, you start your development, and then you kind of get some surprises in there. So like, I mean, Guns N' Roses explains it better. Welcome to the jungle. Thank you. I know I'm in a jungle. You've got some fun and games going on. Hey, this is going to be great. I'm going to fix all these problems. And you're like, you're in the jungle. Yes, I already knew that. And then obviously, you get the last, oh, well, wait, what? You're going to get one of those like you're going to die moments, like when you realize that the way you've picked to build your solution is just not going to work. You're like, oh, developers are going to hate it. It's not going to work. Or this one requirement kind of comes in at the last minute, and you're like, oh, it kind of blows things up. So we went through a few of those moments working on this project where we realized that, hey, we need to kind of tweak this. And so what we're talking about today, I'll talk a little bit about the process we went through, and I'll talk mostly about the final solution that we've come up with, like the end result of what we have. This is still a work in progress. We plan on refactoring this a lot and adding new features to it, keeping kind of the core contract. Like one of the main ideas behind this is we don't want our consumers of configuration to have to do much work to get their application configured. Make it as easy as possible to meet the requirements we already had. So here's a high-level architecture overview. We've got down the bottom is the ZooKeeper part of it. That's our centralized configuration service. Well, it says service, but basically it's ZooKeeper. We store our data in ZooKeeper there, and it's there. Now, the way the data is edited is we have a configuration management UI. That's a Grails application, uses AngularJS. Developers log into there, make changes in there. As we roll this out, then there's like an audit process where once they make changes, they request someone else to approve them. Someone else approves them, then the changes will be staged to go live. Then the applications there they retrieve their configuration directly from ZooKeeper. There's another slide I'm going to show here that shows how it works with multiple data centers. There's a lot of text in this slide. I'm not going to read it all. Basically, we have one main ensemble that we do all our writes to. And then in each of our data centers, we have a separate set of ZooKeeper observers. Now, if you're not familiar at all with ZooKeeper, I'm going to have a little bit more overview of ZooKeeper. But the point of this is that one of the things with our remote config project is we wanted to make sure that if anything were to break, that applications could still start, and our configuration aspect of it wouldn't be the thing that broke them. Obviously, if there's a partition between your data centers, other things are probably going to be broken, but we wanted to make sure that at the lowest level, the configuration management part of it wasn't going to be the thing that would keep your application from starting. So that way you could build other resilient layers above that.
What are the green boxes, things with the services?
The greens with the O's, those are the observer nodes. So there's the primary nodes, the ZooKeeper ensemble, those ones that where writes happen. And then the observer nodes are just read-only instances that get the writes synchronized to them. So they're local to each data center to provide fast reads. And because we have that one management UI that does the management, like the writes all go to there and they get sent out through those nodes. So there's a couple of concepts here I'm going to talk about that are in our system. These are not like mind-bending concepts. Like the first concept on the back, there's a question? Is there a what? Oh, if there's a notification to the other clients when the changes happen in the master. In our current system, we don't have things doing live reloading based on that. ZooKeeper does support watches on Z nodes, which makes it easy to do that. And that's one of the things we plan to add to our solution in the coming, whenever it becomes a priority to add it. But as of right now, it doesn't, but it's fairly easy to add that because ZooKeeper has support for that out of the box. There's a way to just kind of say, hey, when this data in this Z node changes, execute this callback or something. There's ways to do that, but as of right now, we haven't put it in there yet, but it's something we're planning on adding in. So one of the concepts here, sorry, the question that I was answering was whatever. I already answered it, so. The question was about if there's a notification when the data changes in the master node. Okay, so one of the concepts is the concept of configuration and just a set of properties necessary to create an object. So in the case of a database, it'd be the connection URL, the driver class. We almost always use connection pools, so it'd be the connection pools, sizes, like how often the min size, max size, whatever. For remote proxies, for some of our RPC-based remoting, it'd be the interface that it requires and the server that it's served on, those types of things. I mean, this is not a unique concept, the concept of configuration. The UI that we edit the configuration in looks something like this. The name of it, we called it Triple E based on a long series of obscure, really random chains of weird names. It started out as being external something like it had 3 E's in the name, so then we started calling it Triple E, and then someone just said Triple E, and the name stuck. I wasn't around when it happened. I was out that day or something, but it's there. So this is simple configuration editor screen. You edit things in there. One thing you'll notice too on the left-hand side is one of the people, one of you out there identified copying values between environments as being a hassle, and that is a hassle. We have, on the left-hand side, we have listed out different environments, different data centers. As we add more data centers, it's trivial to add more down there if there's a configuration specific to a given data center. We do have a separation between the environments, though. Applications are only able to read data specific to their data center. When I talk about ZooKeeper more in depth, I'll explain how that works. But for now, you just need to know that a dev instance can only read dev config data. A live instance can only read live config data. They can't hop the rails and have your live instances start talking to your dev database and get really weird things happening. Also, if you going back to the other slide, this one has an SSH key, the private key in there. This was just a dev private key. There's no passphrase on our dev private key for this particular configuration. But the passwords, once they're entered in, they're encrypted. And they're encrypted with a key that's specific to the individual environment. We have a process in place, so if we can incrementally change the keys if the key gets compromised for some reason. We can roll out new keys and then re-encrypt all the passwords, so that way when the application comes up again, it's got newly encrypted keys, and the developer doesn't have to do anything in that case. Obviously, the Triple E, the admin UI we have for this, has to have all those keys, so we can write the encrypted passwords to all of those. Another thing that we do is another pain is just kind of when things are really similar, but they only change with one little value between environments. Maybe you have the same database you talk to in every environment, but the username or password changes. We have the way of inheriting configuration from a parent level one. There's paths in there, and basically anything from a lower path will get any values from the higher path and then override anything that has the same property name. So if there's say there's an RPC service called core services, which sets a host name that service is talked to on a port number. So everything that you talk to at core services is on that specific host with that specific port. When the bottom one would say, okay, well this one is this interface. So that way you only have to edit what's different for that one node, and you can move on and do the rest of the stuff. So that way if that service gets changed to a different host, you can change it at the top level and not have to worry about changing it everywhere else. Now, we talked about configuration. Now, the way we get access to these configurations for an application is through binding to that configuration. So bindings are how we say, okay, my application needs to use this database, needs to use this remote service. It's a concept that's used other places. Here's what our binding editing screen looks like. You have a list of, again, similar to environments. Bindings are most often done at the global level. But we have the capability of setting a specific override at an individual level. So if you have, there's also the ability to override bindings at a host name level. If you have like a specific instance you need to do, it's, like a special instance every once in a while you have. And there's reasons we want to avoid doing that, but there's times when it's necessary. So rather than say, no, you can't do that, we have accommodated people who have, kind of special cases. The ability to, it's also you can bind configurations on versions, so when version 3.0 is released, regardless of the environment, it'll get a different binding set. One of the things that kind of differentiates our solution, what we came up with from a lot of the solutions we've seen around, is that we focus a lot on creating objects when we are on the other side and not just creating properties, which is a departure from the norm for a lot of remote configuration things, where you just get a set of properties or a type-safe set of properties, whatever you get, and then it's up to you as a developer to extract the values from that property and then create your database driver yourself or create the data source yourself. One of the things we noticed is that as we were doing that, it was really common to have people just kind of copying and pasting that creation logic, like, okay, I got these properties, now I'm going to make my data source. I'm going to just copy, let me think. I used that data source in my last project. Oh, I'll just copy that and paste it in here. And you see, you kind of have a lot of copy paste going on. It's not the end of the world, the copy and paste configuration things, but by us taking that and taking kind of the pain of creating those objects and just doing it like in one spot and in our library and kind of handling it there, it makes it so the developers are free to not have to worry about that. Because in general, if the developers are kind of copying and pasting configuration, they're kind of indicating that they really don't care how they get that data source. They just want a data source. So they copy and paste it. And in the same case, with our library handling, creating a data source for them, they can still not care about creating the data source, but it also frees us up to make improvements to our library, make improvements to what the data source are getting, change connection pool providers on them, things like that. Another thing we also, but there is an asterisk on there. Properties are supported too. There are times when you're not creating like a database driver. You're not creating like a Rabbit MQ connection pool. You're not connecting to a Redis database. You have something that's legitimately just a property you want to just inject somewhere, and we support those too. But if you're taking a bag of properties and building something from it, we prefer that our developers would just build an object creator for it. We're going to talk about the object creators when we go behind the scenes a little bit. Okay, so the first thing. Okay, well actually, right now, now is a good time. This is the last day of the last presentation, right? Let's just, everyone, if you want to, you can just stretch and take a breath, because we're going to get more interesting now. Ugh. At least I think it's more interesting. I mean, I'm sure this has been interesting up to this point, but let's face it, the slides were a lot of text and not a lot of showing. Yes?
So I heard you mention object wraps. Just to kind of set the expectations, do you support property files?
Do we support property files? We, in which sense? Like support like injecting a whole set of properties?
Z.properties, retrieval.properties, zoo.properties, and I need them in my application, or is it all going to be in-memory programmatic?
The question is if we support properties, like if we have like a zoo.properties or like something.properties file in like the class path, and if we support those. Our library doesn't support those, but we also don't prevent them from being used. So it's up to a developer. Like this isn't like a whole hog. You can either use this or nothing. If somebody has, like for instance, I'm going to show a Spring Boot application later on. Oh, I just gave away the secret. Well, it's Spring 1.2gx. It's no big secret. Everyone has to have a Spring Boot application. That one, there is still like the application.properties file there. Like the good use for that is if you have stuff that doesn't ever change per environment and you're okay with editing the file and pushing it out with your app. Like we're not asking people to like religiously put everything in remote config. We do support adding properties in the remote configuration. So what would normally be in a .properties file can be entered in as just key value pairs in our editor. Just whatever you want in there, and then you can get them injected into your Spring context the same way you would have from a .properties file. So we're going to show that a little bit too. So first of all, we talk about behind the scenes. So Apache ZooKeeper is what we're using to store the data. We had that in the slide earlier. This is just a really high-level overview. I have a really long URL down at the bottom, which you could probably find through Google faster than typing in the URL. If you want a high-level overview. Basically, it stores data hierarchically. It's kind of like a file system. The The nodes in ZooKeeper are called Z nodes, which makes them a little bit different from the file system. One thing that's different about a Z node from a normal file system is that the paths themselves, like any node in the path can store data. So it's not like a file system where you have directories and then you have files. It's the directory itself. If you can think of like the different parts of it having data on them, that's kind of what ZooKeeper lets you do. Also, it's not designed to store large amounts of data. It's designed to store small amounts of data, like kilobytes, like configuration data is a good example. There are other things you can do with ZooKeeper other than just configuration. In our other applications, we use it for leader election and some other things. For this particular application, we're just using it for configuration management. And the way we store the data in ZooKeepers is it matches up a lot with our, we talked about how you can inherit by hierarchy. The storage in ZooKeeper matches that pretty closely. To allow us to lock things down, we have the individual, we call it a habitat there. It's kind of like an environment like dev, QA, beta, live would be like the habitat, and the specific data center. Those ones, to lock those things down, we use ACLs in ZooKeeper to ensure that only dev people, only people that are authenticated as dev can read the dev data. We also, another thing at the point at the top, if you ever hear ZooKeeper and someone's using the JVM to access ZooKeeper, you'll almost inevitably either hear them kind of like go insane or talk about Curator, because those are the only two options you have. You can go insane or you can use Curator. Curator is a Netflix library they have for interacting with ZooKeeper. If you were at the keynote when Mark Fisher talked about the Spring XD, how they're using ZooKeeper there, he mentioned they're using Curator as their library there. It's pretty much the standard way of interacting with it. It provides a good abstraction layer over ZooKeeper and lets you kind of just get down to the nitty gritty. The way we handle the authentication is we have a SASL config, which is, there's a couple prerequisites, because obviously we want to have applications be able to remotely configure themselves, but there's a problem of chicken and egg. They can't remotely configure everything. They need to know where to get the configuration data. So we have a set of files that we keep in a special location on each of our servers that we have Puppet manage. It just gets pushed out, which has the URL for the ZooKeepers and the SASL configuration for that environment and the encryption keys for that environment. So that those pieces of information are necessary for the application to be able to connect and kind of get the rest of the data. And managing those pieces of information through Puppet is not onerous. It's pretty easy because it's kind of the same everywhere. And then the stuff that's different comes down from ZooKeeper. One other plug here for another product that makes managing ZooKeeper easier. There's a product that Netflix also makes called Exhibitor, which is basically cluster management for ZooKeeper. It lets you kind of see your whole state of your whole cluster. You can start and stop your ZooKeepers there. You can navigate the data and kind of see it in a little browser. It shows you the data as bytes, like in hex, and then it shows you it as a string down below. We store our data, as we mentioned earlier, we store it as JSON on those Z nodes, so you can kind of navigate through and see it. Exhibitor makes it easy to manage your cluster. It's not essential to have Exhibitor for what we did with this, but it made it easier. It made our lives a lot simpler. So now we talked a little bit earlier about how we wanted to focus on object creation, but not properties files. So then the question is, how do objects get created? There's basically two classes. There's a configuration class, which provides the information necessary for us to ask the UI elements to get the information from the person when they're creating it. And then there's the creator, which takes that and creates the objects. In general, they're not. We use bean validation. We use bean validation fields on these things, so that way we have validation on them. So if say you need something that takes a port, you have a port, the bean validator for port, so someone can't put in -1 in there. Just some sanity checks. If you need the host name, you can put valid host name checkers on there. Mark certain fields as required. So here's an example of what one would look like. So here's one. This is the actual config file for our SFTP session factory config. So we'll have the annotations on the top marking what category it fits in, so the UI knows where to kind of fit it when they're navigating in the UI. Required fields are things they absolutely have to implement. In general, if the things that we're creating have defaults of their own, we don't require them to put in defaults here to kind of match their experience when they're creating things.
Are these custom tags, config category, config fields, or they're provided by ZooKeeper's libraries, or the included in them?
Are they which ones?
The at config category.
Yeah, config category. These ones are custom annotations we wrote for this. The port, I believe, is just the port is a bean validator, one that I think it's part of the Hibernate bean validators. But the config category and config field are annotations that we wrote to provide this data for this project. Yeah, that's a good question. The config field, those are used to drive tooltips in the UI, so that we don't have to have like a lot of effort. Basically, when you want to add a new class to this, it's something you want to be able to create. The effort is, I'll admit, it's not the most exciting thing you're developing, you're writing a config class, but when you're reusing it time and time again, it's tolerable. I mean, no one likes writing configuration and creation stuff, but you only have to do it once. It's easy to do, and then from then on, when you see how it works when you're running your applications, we think it's worth a little bit of effort at the front. So the password fields, if a field is marked as a password field, that means it's going to be encrypted. It's going to not be displayed after it's been entered in. It's not going to be displayed in the UI for anybody, so that way people can't just go look up your master database password and do whatever. Then the creators, I don't have a full creator here because the slides are kind of limiting how much you can put in there, because you can imagine what this looks like. I'll show one of these later when we start showing some more code examples. But it's a simple interface to just say object creator. It's a generic interface, takes the configuration and the type that it creates. So say this one created an object called example object, takes in a config, it did whatever necessary to make it, then returns the config. As you can imagine, this code is not the most exciting code in the world, but then again, creating it from properties files generally isn't either. So here's a list of some of the configurations we made just internally that we've done and we've been using. Database connections, Mongo connection pools, RPC proxies, REST resources, Redis connections, FTP, SFTP, executor services, Elasticsearch, Solar. I mean, pretty much things that you kind of want to configure, right? And then properties and system properties are also in there. Okay, so now the question you're probably wondering, okay, you got a lot of stuff in here. How does an app? So as a developer, most of you in here, I assume, are developers. You want to know, well, how would I use this library? You've done a lot of work so far, but what are you doing? How do you use it? So here's where I'm going to describe a little bit how our current approach evolved from this. Our first pass at this was to just go to XML, right? So this was our very first pass at this. It was simplest. Under the covers, what we have too, I should have mentioned this earlier. Under the covers, we kind of have not all of our applications are on Spring at the moment. As they migrate to use remote config, there's still some that haven't been able to migrate yet to use this. They're actually going to be migrating to all have a kind of a Spring under the covers. But when we started developing this, there were some we weren't sure if we were going to get them to have replace the IOC container they had with Spring. So we had to kind of, when you can't rely on a specific IOC container, and the other one the option is, developing a framework is kind of difficult. So at the bottom level, we have a JNDI layer where you can kind of look up these objects from in a JNDI context. And so that's what this first pass was, basically saying, we had a namespace, remote config, look up, give it an ID, give it the JNDI name, it'll look it up from our custom context and give it back to the context. Now if you're looking at this probably is not very exciting to you because this looks like a lot of boilerplate stuff. Not only that, if you just entered the bindings in, you're like, I just entered this somewhere else, so now I'm typing it twice. My life has not been made better, which was what we found. We never actually even rolled this one out. We developed this one, used it internally to kind of prove the concept that the objects could be created properly and stuff, and then quickly moved on to the next one, which was the auto create annotation. We just say remote config auto create. What this one does is when the application starts, it goes out to ZooKeeper and looks up all of the bindings for that application. And then it will go through each binding and then basically create a bean definition for each individual binding, put it into the Spring context, and then move on to let the rest of the application context start up. So by creating bean definitions, we're able to put these things into Spring context early enough that they can be auto-wired into other beans. So if you need a data source in your other bean, you can just auto-wire it in. You can do it by name, by type, whatever. To Spring, it looks exactly the same as if you put it in an XML file and it parsed it out as a bean definition from the XML, just straight across. The next pass of this was we started migrating our apps over to Java configuration-based configs. So we added this enable remote config. It looks kind of similar to Spring Boot's enable auto configuration. I swear ours was before Spring 1 last year, so it wasn't the name. But fortunately, we didn't enable an auto configuration because then one of us would have had to change, and you wouldn't want to have been there for that showdown. So now also, the other thing, if you're into tweetable apps, you can kind of start thinking to yourself, like in the Spring Boot context, like what could you do with this if you don't have to even bother configuring things? All you have to do is enter the bindings. You have your services all in there. You need to talk to a database, do whatever. Your application starts up. The enable remote config is going to be putting in there like a data source for you. You're just going to have it. You can just grab at it. So you could actually have a tweetable app that talks to a real database. You know, red values produce a real service. You could make your app. It becomes a lot easier. The other thing we added in was the ability to access properties, like somebody asked about earlier, if we support properties files. They're not properties files, they're properties sources that come out of ZooKeeper. We created a property source which pulls the properties. Properties are basically a map, you know, with a different package space because they're a little bit special, but they're basically a map. And we also created a property sources placeholder configurer. And what that lets you do is, you know, if you're creating things, I don't have an XML example here, but this also works for XML configs. These remote properties that are coming in, you can use them to configure your XML. You can use them to configure things in, if you have a Java configuration, the value annotation. This is the same way you work with any other Spring property. As a developer, you work with it the same way you would as if it was just a .properties file you were reading in. The only difference is where you enter the data and you can reuse those properties across multiple apps quite easily. Okay, so now you're probably ready for a demo, right? Well, I'm ready to give a demo because that's a lot of talking. Okay, so at this point we're gonna start looking at an example application that we have, one of our simple microservices where we first just started evaluating Spring Boot. It's not totally as beautiful as other ones are, but it's still pretty simple. And then I'm gonna show some of the code samples we have. Let me get out of this. Okay. So first off, this application I'm going to now is just it's a microservice. It's called Common Services. It sits behind the applications that our car dealers use to manage their inventory, their other products we have. This is kind of behind the scenes of the behind the scenes stuff. So we have here, this is our application. This is standard Spring Boot style, you know, run. This one, we're importing here our application config, and we have another metrics config to start some of our own internal measurement and stuff. Our application config is where we have the remote config annotation on here. We have repository identifier here. This is a Jersey-based application, so we're registering a Jersey servlet in there, registering our message source, some other things. So now to run this one, standard same thing, do Spring Boot run. This is Maven's target. Just to show there's nothing up my sleeve, I'll actually run it just from this one, not that one, that's the parent. So here's the Spring Boot run. So here's there's our little boot starting up. I'm going to scroll back to look at the logs so we can show you kind of how it looks from the developer when it's starting up. It should be started up. Yeah, about, there we go. 10 seconds, it's up, it's running. So let's go back here and show you what we were doing when we started up. So here's our little boot. I got a little shout out to you guys. Hello, Spring 1 2GX attendees. We have some debugging data there. One of the things, you know, we mentioned that a prerequisite is having the files in place to, you know, be able to connect to ZooKeeper. We spit out some debugging information to make sure that if there's an issue, we can easily say, okay, the issue is the file, you know, for whatever reason, the file was in the right spot or whatever, just to quickly rule that out before we go into more debugging. Then when it comes to here, this is our auto create bean definition parser is running here. This is the auto create is doing this stuff. So these four things are being created automatically for the application. It's injecting in the Spring context, we're getting an account locator, which is, in our case, it's calling one of our existing RPC services. It's creating one of this type, which is the Java class or the Java interface of that account locator. We have this metrics graphite publisher properties, which are a set of properties that are our internal metrics library, which handles, you know, measuring of application performance and things. That one's configured by those properties. That's getting injected with this name as that type. Program provider service is getting injected as this type. And user locator is getting injected to this type. This application is much simpler than a lot of our other ones. A lot of our other ones have maybe 20 or 30 service endpoints are getting injected, lots of different databases and things. That's why I wanted to show this one, because it's simple to say, you just enable remote config, and then the parts of the application that use that, like the support contact service, like it just auto wires it in. There's no there's nothing in here configuring this. It just happens to be there. When the program starts, it gets it, connects it, runs it, great. So the developer is now freed from the concern of, where does this property live? How do I configure this? You can just start it up and run with it. Let's see. So that is just kind of it running and working. Kill this app. I'm going to start diving into some of the code to kind of show some of the parts of the code that we had that kill it. I don't want to leave it running. Go to the switch to the other project. So here's our config provider project. Now, I mentioned we had a couple things in here that may be of interest. Now I'm going to show some of this code here. Unfortunately, this code, this is one of our projects at our company. We haven't. This is not an open source project. If there's interest from people of using this, we don't feel this is proprietary, what makes or breaks us as a company. So I don't think there'd be a lot of resistance to releasing this stuff out there. But it's kind of we'd have to have some kind of acknowledgement that anyone actually cares, because it's kind of like having a birthday party. You don't want to rent a bouncy house unless you have friends first, right? So if there's any interest, just you can send me contact me afterwards. We can talk about it and see if we can get this thing kind of opened up a bit. But first off, here's the I'll show the property source, how we handle the property sources. There's a couple little quirks in here that if you were to say that you just want to just go about and not that one. Let me go back to the configure. So if you were to go about creating one of these on your own, and let's say you didn't want to do the object creation, you just wanted to do properties, you're probably going to want to do a property sources placeholder configurer. If anything, just to say the name, because this rolls off the tongue. The property sources placeholder configurer, and ours, we're extending a parent one from the Spring class, and we're kind of doing some stuff in here to kind of register our stuff in there and make it so that the value annotations magically work. There's a couple pitfalls if you go about and do this you're going to want to pay attention to. One of them is that this thing runs really early in the Spring initialization cycle. It's really early because it has to be early because it's there when other bean definitions are being created, and it's resolving those properties to create other beans. And so no other beans are going to be created at this point. It's going to be just your code, and you're going to be working at the bean definition level. So in here we have, the reason I'm mentioning this is because there's a bug in here early on that we had to track down. That there's a couple, you have access to the bean factory, and there's a convenient class, and they're like, hey, bean factory, give me all the beans of this type. They're like, hey, give me all the beans that are of my remote config type. And you're like, oh, cool, that's an easy way to get them. But if you tell the bean factory to give you beans instead of giving you bean definitions, you're going to be forcing the bean factory to go through and initialize beans as it's doing it. And if you're initializing beans and there's not a property placeholder that's configured yet, and it needs those values to be configured, you're going to get a bunch of explosions in random places about how it has no idea, which properties it needs to set. So if you're going to do this, you're going to want to go work at the bean definition level. So you just grab the bean definition names and kind of walk over them, and then add them to your property list source. In general, that's probably the trickiest part of it. I think we also had to kind of do one little hack. We had to there's this environment. We had to kind of hack it and make it accessible so we could kind of extend it. I'm not sure. There may be a very good reason why it wasn't why it was private before, but it works. So, but we keep close attention to that one in case it breaks in the future. But there's just another minor hack we had to put in there. But in general, there's not a ton of code there to do that. Let me see what else there is here. So the other thing, the auto-create bean definition parser, this is what, when you're going to the creation thing, this is what's driving that creation. So here we have property placeholder configure. That one's actually not used. Let's see. So what we do in this one is we have, because we're kind of performance nerds, ZooKeeper is not slow. ZooKeeper is relatively fast, but at this point in the startup, we know that these beans the way the objects are created, we know that they're not going to be dependent on each other. So we can freely kind of farm this out to multiple threads at startup to get the bean definitions created early on. So we have a little pool here that kind of, once we get the list of bindings, we fork it off, and then in parallel get all of the data for each of those bindings. So that way we can get this part created quickly. This might be a little bit confusing to some, and it's not strictly essential. Basically, all this stuff that looks kind of like a lot of like management of keeping track of like what's going on. In general, you can just understand. In general, what you just need to know is that we're grabbing beans, creating them, shoving them into the context, and then we're using listenable futures to kind of drive this process because we don't want to do it serially just so we can have the application start faster. When we go to actually register them with Spring, the Spring context has a pretty large synchronized block there because it has to make certain guarantees about what things can be modified while beans are being registered. So we'll generate the bean definitions in parallel, and then they have to be registered serially because of the way the Spring container itself requires you to do it.
Is this because for every definition you're doing to pull properties?
Yes. So if we go, I'll actually show you that configuration UI here to maybe. What's that?
So what was it that you were trying to optimize?
We're trying to optimize by doing it in parallel, you say? There's some I/O weight when you're talking to ZooKeeper. It's not a lot of weight, but we saw we could shave a couple seconds off of startup time. I mean, we're not talking like minutes; it's seconds.
Well, what I'm curious about is, would you guys consider using some of the background stuff that Curator provides to sort of do a callback style? So instead of like watching the thread, you kind of tell it, hey, go and fetch this thing, and by the time you retrieve it, call it back.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. The question was if we considered using Curator's built-in callback style retrieval for this. I can show you what we're doing for the definitions thing, and it might make more sense why we're doing it this way. Because in this case, this class isn't actually talking to ZooKeeper directly. It's going through our resolving process. And in the resolving process, those nodes, this one's kind of working at the high level, saying, hey, resolve this node. And when we do this process, remember how we talked earlier, how things can be overridden from the parent level. So it's not just one node we have to look at, it's multiple nodes. And so the binding node resolvers we have working, those ones are the ones kind of hitting those ones. And I believe that code, let me look at that one real fast. It's been a little while. It's been a little while since I've had to dive too deep into that one. But when that one's resolving its binding node, it has to basically, it has to access the one node, and then it has to check and see if it's been overridden anywhere else. Yeah, basically it has to walk the tree, exactly. And so I don't believe we do that one in callback style. We could. So yeah, we resolve. Basically check if the client exists. We have a client we share across a lot of things. Let's see. I think this is where we do most of it. Yeah, I believe this one is not using the Curator frameworks, built-in like look me up type, like built-in callback things. But that's one of the things that we could easily put in there. That's a good question. What's that? Yeah, well, once the application started up, we kill the thread pools and stuff. So it's not, we shut down. These are only used at startup time. So, and generally at startup time, a lot of our other stuff hasn't started happening. But you're right. There's some trade-offs. Okay, let me see. Now we showed some screenshots earlier of the configuration management UI. I'll show you really quickly what it looks like from a developer as you're going in here. So this is the one we launched, CC Common Services. Here's a set of properties we have. This is where the bindings are defined. Now, the way we go to edit these properties, let's say we want to look at that metrics graphite publisher. Property. So this is a property where, we have a creator, which is a generic properties creator. We have at the top so on the left-hand side is where so it's talking about support for properties file. The left-hand side is kind of the key in the property. So if we were to add a field at the global level, we could have a property just like, some property. And then there's a properties file, so there's just any value goes on the side. So some value. The validate step on this one is pretty simple. Just make sure that whatever we entered in matched, some thing. So if this was a typed validation, if this was like some other object type other than properties, that would do more validation there. Show the diff to see what changes there are between, this one's local storage stuff here. I have some other pending changes from some different requests. Let me clear this out. We use local storage a lot in our application here for doing that. Let me add that. Now, as a developer, what I do here is I make the changes here, and then one step that's a little bit of a hassle is I would then go to do the request. Now, this is one of those hassles that's kind of like a requirement of this, was the ability to audit these changes. So this process, we have a process in place where these changes can be audited and approved by other developers around, the technical lead on their team can approve them, the systems engineers can approve them. It's generally pretty easy. So if we put in here, like this is, then I'm actually not going to do in this one because this is our live system. I really don't want this to go live. If I were to hit the request, then we have a HIP chat room and people just kind of monitor and they kind of go in there, look at it, and make the changes there. But that gives us that auditing we wanted to look into, the security things, so that way, as a developer, I couldn't just go in there and, hey, I'm feeling particularly excited today. I'm going to dramatically change how our databases are configured, and then just do it by my own, and either by negligence or most often you're protecting against negligence, but it could be malicious intent or whatever, change and break everything. So that's that little audit step in there. Let's see what else we have that might be interesting to show. I think we've got, in general, it's like, the creators. Let me show you an example of the creator. We talked a little bit about creators earlier. I mentioned that this, again, is not the most exciting code, but it's kind of the necessary evil if you want to provide objects, you got to create the objects. Someone's got to do it. The beautiful thing about the way this is set up is that the contract we have with the consumers of this library is that they enter data somewhere in a remote system, they enable remote config in their application, and they get objects created for them. We're free as a framework team and as a framework developers to completely rewrite this entire thing. And if we wanted to do this creation step differently, this could be completely refactored. As long as that same contract of when they ask for things, they get things at startup, as long as that's fulfilled, this stuff can all be refactored. So this was our first pass at it. We have a config for like a database pool. And then we have, pretty straightforward. And we have a creator that takes those things in there, and then, if the things aren't null, it sets them. Kind of annoying. With the Java, once we refactor this to be more Java 8 friendly, a lot of this stuff can be a little bit more clean, but at least it only has to do it once. So the creators, again, they're not super exciting, but they exist. You do them once. Then as an application developer, you don't ever have to do it again. You just kind of get them sent to you as remote configured objects. Go back to the slides. We have a couple more slides left.
Hey, Ryan, before you go.
Yes.
Those creators, they seem, in my head, to be something like the concepts that Spring Cloud is servicing, that they also call service creators or connectors, something like that. Have you thought about, leveraging that at all? I mean, it's probably brand new. But
No, you're absolutely right. Like that actually does lead into what we're going next. It's like where we, well, I don't have to pull this slide, but it was basically, when we started this project, Spring Cloud was just like, obviously it was a different it was the Cloud Foundry pieces of it. It wasn't even like the new patterns there. And so now as they've announced more things, like they have the service creators and things like that, we're looking at those patterns and see how we can refactor some of this stuff, because I'm on the framework team. We like to develop frameworks and stuff, but we don't like to maintain like this stuff forever. And wherever possible, we like to leverage existing stuff. So that's one of the things we're looking at doing. Another thing is putting in place, right now this met the needs of our first deployment. Get this stuff out there, kind of replace properties files, get some security auditing in place, and it matched kind of our current paradigm. But to extend this out to make certain things like, to make our remote proxy calls, for instance, to make those be like handled by service discovery instead of just hard-coded like host files, that's pretty straightforward for us to do. We just have to change how the object gets created and have that stuff encapsulate the service registry lookup, have it so that way when the proxy that they use gets created, it's doing that stuff behind the scenes for them. And the developers want to change any of their code, and they'll suddenly go from having a setup that was at one point talking to a specific server. Now it's going to be doing service discovery actions to resolve its stuff. So I mean, those types of things, like with the contract that hey, you ask for us for configuration, or you ask us for configured objects, we give them to you. It gives us freedom to make those objects configured in different ways than they currently are now. So looking and tying into existing libraries, like the ones that are in the Spring Cloud projects that they announced, and then also, for instance, putting in client-side load balancing, using either ribbon or other patterns like that.
What about their configuration system? That seems like a natural fit for what you're doing, unless you've got a constraint.
The configuration system that they have is a little bit different. Like but looking at like the core abstraction layer, it'd be interesting to see how we could make ours kind of work into that. I think there is a way to kind of do it. I mean, that one. Like the one that Dave Sire demoed is a little bit different. That his is using a Git repo under the covers for it, and ours is using ZooKeeper. I mean, at the base level, I mean, there's a difference. There's a couple other differences in how we handled like I'm not sure. I haven't looked at it in depth enough. And I'm actually, once we leave here, it's one of the things I'm going to look at is how they handle the things like one of the things that we handle and we support. Is let's say we want to have a specific instance on a specific server have a completely different configuration. Let's say we have this concept of tags, like the control center application, for instance, as where is this tag overriding? Yeah, it could have there's a tag name here. I can add another tag just for like example. The sample tag, and so if I create a tag, which is just like a one-off kind of tweak of the configuration. Let's say, this one it wants to publish to a special port, and then when I go to the binding screen, I can then set up the bindings to bindings. I can tell bindings that when the application is running only on the host name of like foo1.com. It's not a valid host name. It's not one of our host names, but let's say it was. I can tell that one to use the different tagged version of that configuration. We can, because there are sometimes when there's some edge cases, like in the beginning when we talked about the hey, you're gonna die thing, and welcome to the jungle, like you have this whole entire system made up, and those edge cases are what kill you. We have a lot of edge cases we kind of support in here that matched how our developers over the years have done things. So looking at how to support some of those edge cases in both systems and finding some common ground there is important. And I haven't had a chance to look at that enough to see how it would address those edge cases. It may very well have some. I think that I saw some tagging and some labeling support and stuff, but I haven't had a chance to look at it in depth. Okay, so we've done some demos here. So yeah, now we're talking about future plans and expansions. As I kind of already explained a little bit, some of our future plans and some of our ideas and how we plan to expand this is service discovery is one obvious way. Build on top of it. Also, we plan on adding the ability to support certain types of properties to manage like feature flags, things like building on top of ZooKeeper's built-in support to add watchers on there, so you can have development where you can push features live but have them dark behind a feature flag, and then turn on and off features just by toggling a value in there. That's one of the ones that's definitely on our roadmap. That's very easy to add on with a ZooKeeper-based data storage. It'd be difficult with a different one. You'd have to kind of constantly be pulling it, but there's support in ZooKeeper to do these kind of pulling operations and then just kind of get that behavior almost for free. There's still some more stuff like there. Probably would build on top of some of the stuff we saw in Spring Cloud. They have reloadable properties or whatever, reloadable things. Like we almost definitely build on top of that. Again, a lot of these are just kind of like ideas we have. A lot of it comes down to like prioritization and resources and things like that. And but we believe that focusing on creating the actual objects for the developer gives us that level of freedom of we can enhance it however we want. We can make it better for them. So now, we're at the questions point of this. We've had some questions already, but feel free to ask. We're actually a little bit early. I guess I should have slowed down talking a little bit more. But what are some other questions you guys have about this approach, or anything you want to see that I haven't shown?
The creators that showed to create the Spring Factory beans also do the same job.
Yes, the Spring Factory beans do the same job. The reason these ones aren't using Spring Factory beans is because the creators they're creating objects to go in the JNDI context, and we don't yet have Spring on every single one of our applications that use this. And so we can't really rely on a lot of Spring classes in them to do it. So it's one of those like areas like, oh, I got to do this by hand, because I mean, there are things that Spring has that would make it nicer. We're working towards making sure we have that, so we can kind of rely on some of the Spring classes to make some of these things easier. So that way we don't have to, don't have to just do all of this stuff kind of by hand. Yeah, that's an excellent point.
How do you set it up for local development?
Excellent question. How do you set it up for local development? Glad you asked. I'll show you. Now, local development in general, we assume that the local developers want to talk to the developer instances. That's the pattern we usually use. There is a property set. If only for the local environment can you override things that come from real config with a local overrides file. So I can just, there's a kind of a funny little syntax and how they're named, which is based on the paths they are on ZooKeeper, but we have a way to download like an overrides file that has a list of all the properties that you're getting from the remote config. And then you can edit it and just override the ones you want to override. So you can say, oh yeah, this one, I want to run this. Like the most common case is you want to run like one of the services you're calling. You want to run that, oh, this one's running on, this one's localhost, because you're running both the service and your application locally. That's a very common case. And so this file can live in a couple places. If it's a commonly used one, like all your team always, when you're running locally, you always do it this way. Like you always run a local Mongo, or you always do something else. We support putting this file either you can have it in the class path of the application when it runs, and it only gets used for local development, so you can check it in and it works. If you have a override, and on top of that, there's a couple, when the application starts up, it looks in several places. One of them is your home directory for the application name .localoverride.properties or localconfig.properties. One of them is in the class path. So there's ways that you can kind of meld with different scenarios of local development. In general, you want it to be connected so you can get the rest of them, so you can kind of see those ones coming down to you. But yeah, local development is one of the ones that it's kind of like you do kind of want to sometimes override that and not have everyone have it there, and you don't want to do it. You could do it the tag way, where you kind of edit the tag and put your laptop's host name in there and get a different configuration via the tag. But that's no one's ever wanted to do it that way for some reason, because it's kind of onerous. That's a good question. Another thought. Yeah. I think there's another question. Yes, in the back.
All your apps in Java?
All of our apps are on the JVM currently. We're looking there. There are some other apps that are not on the JVM, and we believe that we're going to be supporting them through the remote config at some point. The configuration data we store is in JSON, so obviously all the library we have to parse it now is all Java. So like when those other ones are going to want to consume things from here, the way we have these object creators working for them is not like it's not like a perfect fit. So there's an impedance mismatch there. So we're gonna need to investigate how to work with that. Yeah, that's an excellent question. This works well for us because we have the JVM across all of our applications currently. All of our applications that need to be configured currently, at least. Yes.
Does your configuration service support kind of like a hierarchy of properties? So say, first thing first, I want to make sure that this property, if I have one that's called out for a specific host, that one's always resolved first over like the default property version. Kind of like a hierarchy.
So the question was if our configuration system supported setting up like a hierarchy, so you could say, this host, this property always wins. Sort of. I mean, like the way it works is, if you wanted to do a per host environment, like a per host change, what you do is you could use a tag thing where like the tags, you tag that one host, and then that whatever configuration that came with that tag, it would give you that. Because the properties that get sent down to the application, it doesn't see an override. I'm like on the thing. So the tag one. Let me step back here. With that tag support, it would let you do that. Basically say, this host, I want to make sure that this property is set to this value. or like this particular, or if it's a properties file, that would be a properties configuration, that would be the one you do it. Or if it was a like database configuration, it'd be more like on this host, I want to make sure this database uses this number of connections. Would be the, because we think in terms of like the objects that get created, not necessarily the properties, but in general, they're stored as just like little fields in JSON. So does that answer your question, or?
Yeah, and the tags are not configurable from the client side. They're only
Your tags are configurable on the server side, yes. So on the servers where you bind to those tags, you can do it not necessarily, you don't have to do it by host name. You can do it by like an application label where the application can say, hey, I'm this type of application. Like, hey, the application can identify itself in a way that it would get a certain labeled set of tags. So that would be configurable on the host side. But you wouldn't be able to override it on the host side, because then the only place you can override these files like with local stuff is for like local development. Currently, again, this is all software and it's not set in stone. But like for the current development, this was like the way that worked best for us. But as we work with our teams and we implement this and more of our applications, like we're open to making changes to whatever makes sense to make things work.
as of now, as you make changes in your configuration server, you would have to restart a wrap, right?
Yes. As of right now, to make changes in your application server and the configuration server, the apps need to be restarted. Yeah, we plan to add the ability to do like hot reloading of certain things, certain subsets of things, but that's not, we just haven't had a chance to do it yet. We believe we can do it. It just, we don't have the.
Another question would be, how you explained that how config server would differentiate from environment development. I'm sure you.
How the config server does what?
How config server would differentiate from one environment or the environment?
Yes. Excellent question. So the config server basically writes into specific paths based on whatever the environment the UI is editing them for. So if you're editing for dev, whatever. And the config server is only involved in the editing of the configuration. The data then gets stored in ZooKeeper, and the application is talking to ZooKeeper directly. So the application knows which environment it's running in. It's like an environment setting on the host, so it knows like the part of our application configuration, in addition to the private key for the environment, the list of zookeepers, and there's also like the environment settings saying, hey, I'm in dev, I'm in live, or whatever. And so when the application starts, it then checks against these things. The other thing is there's also like a login configuration file, like a SASL configuration file, which gives it like a password that connects to ZooKeeper with. And when the configuration server is creating those nodes for the configuration clients, the ones in the dev node get world. They're readable only to the dev environment, people that have the dev credentials or whatever. So only applications that start up and connect with the authority given by that one SASL file can read those nodes. The configuration server has its own special, basically like an admin ACL that it connects to it with, which lets it have like read-write access to all of them. But it also, so when it connects to them, it just sets those things through the ACL part is just built into ZooKeeper, like the ability to control it that way. So we lock it down with the ACLs, and also the things that are secrets like passwords and stuff like that. We encrypt with the environment-specific keys. Does that answer your question? Okay. These are good questions. Yes.
So the SASL config files, you said you propagate them using Puppet?
Yes. Yeah, the question was, the SASL config files, do we propagate them using Puppet? And the answer is yes, we propagate them using Puppet. They're the same for basically every server in that environment will have basically the same set of files for those things, which makes it easy to use via Puppet. Whereas, trying to manage 100, 200 applications with different properties, like doing properties files via Puppet, we investigated that briefly and ruled that out pretty quickly as an option because it would be difficult to manage, but Puppet was good at managing, hey, all these files need to go on all of these servers for this specific environment. Yes?
Did you look at any different object stores? How did you kind of come about using ZooKeeper and not say like MongoDB or something like that?
The question was how we came about using ZooKeeper instead of MongoDB or another object store, something like that, and that's a good question. We do have MongoDB in our stack, and we use it other places for a lot of things. When we were investigating this, the factors that led us towards using ZooKeeper were not only what it did for this specific configuration one, but also what it did easily for future add-ons we definitely want to do, like the ability to watch znodes and get notifications automatically to handle the hot reloading thing. It's not in there yet, but it's really easy to add with ZooKeeper. The other thing we looked at was performance and failover and stuff, and performance across multiple data centers. ZooKeeper's performance in that regard is designed to do this. The code in it is almost neurotic in how it handles its making sure the data gets distributed and make sure it's highly available. So in case of failure, you're still going to be able to get that data. There's one other thing I would add in there that we kind of even in addition to the ZooKeeper's redundancy, there's one more thing we do at the application startup time, which is as we get those configurations down, we do serialize them to disk in like the last known good config. So if there is some kind of apocalypse scenario where like the entire ZooKeeper cluster and all of our observers are out, the application could still start from the last known config it had, and it would be able to use those configurations. We haven't ever had an application need to use that. And again, you could argue that if all of your data, all of your connectivity to all of these ZooKeepers is gone, it's probably a fundamental network failure, so your application's probably not going to be able to do anything anyways. But if it can do anything, if it can do something otherwise, it's not going to be the configuration layer's problem. It's not going to be the configuration layer keeping your application from starting, because this is such a low-level thing. We didn't want to make it like my application would be able to work only, but the config server broke. We're like, so like this thing's we designed it to basically never be the thing that kept an application from starting. Ideally. Yes.
Do you think it would be possible with these techniques to be able to partition and distribute different configurations on different hosts? So if you wanted, certain types of configurations on one server, other types.
Yes. The question was if we think it would be possible to configure the type of configurations per hosts. And the answer is yes. We believe it is possible with this configuration setup and these kind of techniques to do that. What we have in the UI currently to do that is the concept of tags, where you could basically create a tag of the thing and then you'd bind to a different tag with either a label for the host names, if they're differentiated by versions. It's because of the way behind the scenes, the stuff we just need to update the thing to know where to look to get the data based on what it was. So we could add additional concepts to make that specific scenario. If you had one of the we made it really easy to do it by data center and by environment and data center. So if you have if you have a data center in Los Angeles that you want to have different configurations than your data center in Washington D.C., it's really easy to do that because those are just kind of built in top level. Adding an additional layer of abstraction to do that for a different kind of configuration, it could be basically arbitrary at this point. I mean, anything in that bottom level could be arbitrary. You could set things at that level. Oh, so instead of talking to ZooKeeper, so you talk to a different source?
Well, say, for example, you had set up a global configuration you wanted all of your data centers to have.
Mm-hmm.
And you had another set that you wanted, that were specific to each data center. So you wanted to sort of...
Yes. So the question was if you have like a global configuration you want every data center to have. So in that case, you'd have what's an example you can think of? Like a database driver, like a database. Every data center has the same username and password, but maybe the host changes per data center.
Or maybe there's a central server you need access to, so you give it a port and the host name.
Okay, so that would be the global level, then each individual environment. So you say you have like a central server in the global level, then each individual environment, you'd override certain things.
Yeah, and then each one might have a...
Yes, in fact, that's exactly what it's designed to do. Let me just go to like a remoting one. So one of like our RPC-based remoting things. So in this one, this is an example of something we have a global configuration. Now these host names are all internal to our data center, so if you try and ping them, you're not going to be able to. I'm not too worried about this. So there's 21 applications using this. We can see from here. This level here at the top level, I'm in the blue. This is global level configuration. Everyone has this configuration. This particular service is at this path on that server. They all use this interface to interact with this service as like a Java proxy over HTTP invoker or whatever. This grayed out thing, the port number for that service comes from the slash above it. This is core services / account locator. So there's some configuration like the port numbers on the core services one. And the host names are actually done at that level too. Like in the dev environment, the host name is set to this. In the QA environment, the host name is set to this. In the beta environment, the host name is set to this. So there's some global configuration. Everyone gets the same interface. But when you go down to a specific environment, like the host changes across each individual environment. This mirrored what we used to have this in a properties file where we'd have like dev.whatever.whatever, live.whatever.whatever. So that's how we do that for if it's at the data center level or the environment level you want to change it at. If you wanted to do it at a level that's not quite, if you say, well, all live servers that are of, a type, well, in this case, you create the type, you say, well, I want to create a specific configuration. So, this is a live server, I want to have it talk to a specific instance of core services. For instance, let's say you have some kind of production issue where you want to isolate traffic to a different one, and there's ways of doing it other than configuration. But let's say you decide to use configuration to do that. You could create a tag on this and say, well, the host name for this tag is special instance dot whatever, and then you go to the bindings page for the application and say, well, this instance number 5 of this application, it uses this tagged version of that configuration. So when that application starts up, instead of talking to the one all the other ones are talking to, it goes and talks to special instance, whatever. So then if you want to isolate traffic to that, say you have like a certain call gone awry that this one consumer is calling, and it's degrading other things. You could do it that way, and then like I mentioned earlier, as of right now, you'd have to restart the application to do that, but you wouldn't have to redeploy the application to do that. In general, it takes less time for us to, it always takes less time for us to restart than redeploy, because redeploying also involves restarting. So we're looking to add the capability of doing it on the fly without having to restart the application server. It's in the back. We have a backup data store for ZooKeeper is a question. A backup which store? Yes, can we back up the content of this? So the question was, can we back up the content of the live data in the ZooKeeper data store? The answer is yes. There's 2 ways we can do that. One way is just the automatic backup of the ZooKeeper data files, and that's one way we do it. When we were developing this system, there's a tool that people who have administrator access to this. There's a backup restore where we can download a backup file which contains like the entire, this might be slow over the VPN and over wireless, but it downloads like the entire contents of everything in that, and then we can reload from that same file. This is useful for development purposes too. Like if we find that there's something in the JSON that for whatever reason we have like a bug in the UI that doesn't save it right, or we haven't quite developed it right, which when we were doing our early development, the UI wasn't fully baked yet, so we'd actually kind of edit this file. We do backup and restores as our way of editing it. And so like this file, like I'll show it briefly. It's fairly large. It's tons and tons of JSON, but you would not want, this is like this is the property file, the rule all property files, right? Like you wouldn't want to edit this and keep this everywhere, but you could. So there is a backup and restore capability built into it. That was, and for development purposes, it makes it somewhat easy to do certain types of changes that we haven't yet had a chance to build certain UI operations for, like moving things around in different ways that we plan on supporting in the UI, but we haven't yet. Sometimes we'll have to do those kind of behind the scenes in that backup restore layer and then just reload it all. And then the reload process also restores all the ACLs to the ZooKeeper the same way they were before, so that way you don't just suddenly give everything write access to or read access to the nodes they weren't supposed to have read access to. But that was an excellent question, thanks. You guys are asking good questions, which reminds me of things I probably should have pointed out in the first place. Do you have another question?
I have a follow-up question. So if we have a single instance of ZooKeeper, it is pretty simple to restore state snapshot. But how do you restore and sample? Do you have multiple instances of ZooKeeper?
Yes, so the question was, if you have a single instance of ZooKeeper, it's not too hard to restore state to that single instance. But if you have an ensemble, how do you restore state to those? The way we would restore state to those is based like this UI element, how we do it. We're writing it back to the ensemble, so the data could be completely corrupted, and we can reload it all from this file. So this file is on a regular basis. We download the backup file from there and kind of keep that off to the side in addition to the built-in ZooKeeper kind of backup stuff. So if the data is corrupted, we can wipe out the entire ensemble and then reload this file, and then the ZooKeeper's built-in replication between the members of the ensemble will take care of restoring its configuration, and it'll be back to like a good state. It's worth noting we haven't had a case where ZooKeeper has been corrupted yet in either our test environment, our dev environment, or our live environment, but obviously you don't want to learn how to fix it the first time live. So it's a good concern to have, especially with something that, oops, configuration data is broken, guys. Sorry, apps won't start for a while. There's another question in the back.
Do you have any authentication for applications that connect to ZooKeeper?
Authentication for the applications that connect to ZooKeeper? You mean like the applications themselves? Yes, there is. The ZooKeeper applications themselves, they authenticate using the SASL. There's a ZooKeeper supports SASL auth. I'm not sure if it's ZooKeeper or Curator that does it. One of the two. I'm pretty sure it's ZooKeeper, but Curator lets you access it easier. So you provide like a credentials file that's through SASL, and then it has like a password in there. That's one of the files we push out to each box through Puppet. Is the credentials to be able to connect to the ZooKeeper cluster for that environment. It's set in a way that's so that file can be readable to the application, but not to someone who just SSHs into the box, similar to the encryption key. So the application uses that to authenticate to ZooKeeper, so that way it's able to read the nodes. If it didn't have that authentication, it would get like a no authentication error whenever it tried to do something in there. So by having a file there, it's we're able to lock it down so only the applications that have running on those hosts are able to do it. Also, none of those applications have the ability to write data. So like an application could read other data. They could read the encrypted values there and then decrypt them with their secret key, but they couldn't ever modify that data on those specific nodes, on the bindings node or the configuration nodes. Only the configuration editing UI is capable of editing those because of the way the ACLs are set up. Yes?
So I feel like I've been teased. How soon could it be open source?
The question was how soon could it be open source, and I don't have the authority to give you an answer on that, but I can give you some email addresses, and I can have some business cards, and if people are interested in this and would like to have access to it, and I believe we could talk. I think I actually asked. I put out some feelers earlier before I went to this conference. I'm like, hey, we should probably release this out so that A, we're not the only ones maintaining it, and B, no one else ever has to build this themselves. And there was some people were receptive, but I think there's our company hasn't done this before, so like there's probably going to be some obstacles there, just like working through legal type stuff, whatever. But I don't. The technical people involved, I haven't faced any. There's been no objections from the technical people. I think that they're probably the concerns that I'd probably anticipate seeing would be like, okay, what's it? Realistically, are people going to want it? And then is there a chance that people are going to actually, is it going to be a drain on it? Are we going to put this out there and then suddenly it's going to be a huge drain on our resources to support it? That's, so as long as we can kind of satisfy those questions like the business might be concerned with, I think that it shouldn't be too bad. There's no technical, this isn't what makes our company like, money. This is not, car dealerships don't care that we have this product. They like our other products, but this is just behind the scenes, not our competitive advantage. So, but you're right. Sorry for teasing everybody with this. In the back there.
As an alternative to open sourcing yourself, the Spring guys are also working on their own config story. Are you talking to them about maybe taking some of the things that you're doing and having them also include them, or?
No, that's an excellent question. The idea is, instead of just whole hog open sourcing this, working with the Spring guys on their configuration things. I haven't yet talked to them yet. I'm planning on. I was hoping to get a chance to during this conference, but I haven't. I'm planning on contacting them after the conference to see if there's any chance we can kind of work together on this. Because part of it too is like our model. I mean, the way we're building objects might be something that they've considered and just ruled out because they don't like that approach. And so which is a perfectly valid. There could be a difference of opinion on how we handle this concern. In which case, it might be a non-starter. Mm-hmm. No, yeah. No, yeah. So it's kind of a comment. The question/comment was basically that we should work with them and kind of give them an idea of some of the requirements, some of the quirks we work through, possibly contribute some stuff back to them in that way and see if there's any way we can kind of work with them more on this. And I agree with you. I think we should. I mean, I think part of the reason why I'm here speaking at this conference was because they saw this topic and they were interested in it because they knew that's something that they've been working on. This is a common problem a lot of applications face, and they recognize that. And then, yeah. I think there was yes, another question.
How easy would it be to audit the configuration of a server from history? Like, say, I get a log report, something happened last week, and I want to know how that server was configured in the past.
Yes, the question is how easy would it be to look at historical configuration data for the server? It wouldn't be too difficult. Right now we don't have something in there right now to support it. Like it's not in there yet. We haven't had a burning, we haven't had a situation come up yet where we needed to do that. But to do it is not altogether that hard. We would be a lot of log, at this point it'd be log parsing, looking at when the changes were applied and like the version number of the changes that were applied to that server. This would be grepping, right now it'd be basically grepping logs and then looking for the changes in there. But it would be doable, but it would, as of right now, it would be not the easiest thing to do. We could add support to make it better that way. Again, this is one of those things that would be great. It would be wonderful if we had a chance to throw this out there and then someone else wanted. If that's like something that someone absolutely needed, that someone else could just develop that and everyone could benefit from it. I think that's one of the benefits of open sourcing things. But again, I'm not saying I can. I'm just saying that we'll see. Okay, other questions? You guys had a lot of good questions. I'm very surprised because this is the last conference of the last day. Well, I'm not surprised that you have good, well, whatever. I don't think anyone fell asleep either, which is good. So now there's one last slide, which is we're told to say we have to have a call to action here. So here's our call to action. There's not really much, so like, yeah, you don't, if you'd like to have a specific call to action, you can go on Twitter and tweet that, the last presentation or whatever blew your mind and thanks Spring 1 and Spring Central. I couldn't think of a better call to action. I'll have a few minutes afterwards if anyone has any additional questions. I have to leave really shortly because I have a plane like almost immediately leaving. So I have some business cards if anyone wants to contact me later. I can give you a card on my way out. But thank you for your time and thanks for your attention.